Single dad lost his wife to a bridge collapse. 8 years later, the CEO behind it came for help. The sound came at 2:17 a.m. A low groan, then a sickening crack, and then the city shook. By sunrise, the emergency crews were already out. Sirens carved through the gray morning. A massive concrete beam from the Echelon Heights project had snapped in half and collapsed into the mud, burying 2 scaffolds and part of a mobile unit beneath a mountain of rubble. One worker was rushed to the ICU. The other, they were still digging for. In the high-rise boardroom of Centricore Developments, silence blanketed the air like dust. Maya Caldwell stood at the head of the long glass table, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the blueprint projected behind her. She was as still as the steel beams they once swore would never bend. Who approved this segment of the South Overpass, she asked, voice low but slicing. A shuffle. Papers rustled. No one dared speak. Derek Grant, VP of Development, finally cleared his throat. The segment was based on the modified plan Legacy Variant 4.2. It passed inspection last quarter. Maya didn't flinch. Then I want to see Legacy Variant 4.1 and the original blueprint. Someone from legal muttered, "It's in archive. Could take hours to retrieve." "Then stop wasting them," Maya snapped. 5 minutes later, the assistant returned with a tablet. On it, a version of the structural layout, denser, more intricate, and marked with annotations. But something was missing. The author line was blank. Where there should have been a name, there was only a faded watermark, provisional. Internal only. Maya's eyes narrowed. This design, where did it come from? A junior engineer raised his hand hesitantly. "Ma'am, I think the original was written under someone named Ray Donovan, but his file is tagged inactive, non-returnable. Looks like he was removed from the system 8 years ago. Why, Reason Code says professional misconduct following personal trauma." Maya stared at the screen. She remembered that phrase, because once years ago they'd used the same words to keep her out of a boardroom. The garage was old forgotten by Google Maps and modern zoning permits, the kind of place you'd pass by without ever wondering who was inside, the kind of place no one expected a blueprint to survive. Ray Donovan wiped his hands on a frayed cloth and leaned over the engine of a '97 Ford that hadn't purred since the Obama administration. The muffler groaned like it was giving up. "Hold on, girl," he murmured, tightening a bolt. "We're not done just yet." Behind him, a soft voice. "Dad, can I use the yellow crayon?" He turned. Sophie sat cross-legged on the cement floor, her left leg braced and awkward, a notebook open across her lap. She was drawing a bridge made entirely out of stars. "Yellow's in the toolbox," Ray said. "Top drawer left side." Sophie grinned and crawled to get it. "My bridge doesn't collapse," she declared, "even if the moon falls on it." Ray smiled faintly. "Sounds like a good design." Then came the knock. 2 sharp taps on the metal side door, hesitant but confident. Ray wiped his palms, walked over, and pulled it open. There she was, Maya Caldwell. Black blazer, pressed slacks, hair tied tight like a noose. The kind of woman who didn't knock unless the building was on fire or unless she needed something. Ray squinted. "You lost." "I'm looking for Ray Donovan." "You found him," he said without ceremony. She glanced past him, saw the oil, the clutter, the child drawing rainbows on scrap paper. Then her eyes landed on the far wall. There, half covered in a grime-streaked plastic sleeve, was a faded blueprint ripped at the corners, annotated by hand, and stamped with an ID code she knew too well. "Is that the original design for Echelon's overpass?" she asked. Ray didn't answer. He didn't have to. She stepped closer. No author name, no credit line. Just calculations. Ray leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Funny thing about concrete. It remembers who poured it. Doesn't matter who signs the report." Maya turned to face him. "Did you draft it?" "I did. A lifetime ago. Then why is your name missing from every file? Because names are easy to erase when the truth is inconvenient. Sophie peeked up from her sketchbook. Dad says people don't like when you tell the truth too early. They get scared. Maya looked at the girl's small, wiry hair tied with a rubber band that might have once belonged to a carburetor. She saw something in her eyes, brightness unfiltered by cynicism. Then back to Ray. You were removed after a personal tragedy, Maya said. That's what the file says. Ray's expression darkened. My wife died under a collapsed pedestrian tunnel, the one they built after replacing my design with a cheaper variant. I called it negligence. They called it disruption. I buried her, and then they buried me. Maya felt her throat tighten. Still, her voice remained calm. And yet here you are fixing trucks instead of suing them. Ray let out a short, bitter laugh. You ever try suing a billion-dollar company as a widowed single father with no lawyer and a daughter in leg braces? Didn't think so. Silence pulsed in the space between them. Then, we had a collapse this morning, Maya admitted. Same corner, same load-bearing line. Your design was never followed. Ray said nothing. I need your help, she said quietly. Not as a CEO, as someone trying not to let another person die. He looked at her, long and slow. You want me to save your reputation? No, she said. I want you to help me stop lying to myself. That made him pause. Sophie spoke up again. Is this about the bridge that fell on the news? Yes, Maya said, kneeling slightly to meet the girl's eye level. We want to stop more bridges from falling. Sophie offered her drawing. You can have mine. It holds the moon. Maya took it gently, looked at Ray. He shrugged. You get the crayon and the engineer. 2-for-1 deal, she exhaled. We're going to fix this, Mr. Donovan. He stepped aside, opening the door wider. I don't fix reputations, he said. I fix what people forget to see. The meeting room on the 31st floor of Centricore Tower buzzed with tension. Ray stood at one end, arms behind his back, dressed not in a suit, but in his oil-stained work shirt, faded jeans, and boots that still carried the dust of his garage. The polished floor didn't welcome him, but he stood firm, unmoved like steel that had been through fire. Across from him sat 6 executives. Derek Grant occupied the center seat, fingers, steepled mouth, a permanent sneer disguised as diplomacy. Maya didn't sit. She stood beside Ray, close enough to signal allegiance, far enough to observe. Mr. Donovan, one of the board members, began, voice clipped and professional. Thank you for resurfacing. Ms. Caldwell says you might have insights into the structural failure on Echelon's Phase 2. We'd like to hear them. Ray didn't reach for the tablet offered to him. He reached for his pocket instead, pulling out a folded piece of paper, creased and recreased, the ink smudged at the edges. This is what was supposed to be built, he said. Not the thing that fell. Derek let out a polite chuckle. With respect, Mr. Donovan, we've had 5 revisions since your version. We're operating in 2025, not 2013. Ray looked at him, expression unreadable. Tell that to the family of the man who hasn't come home yet. Silence. He unfolded the paper slowly and laid it flat on the table. The original plan had a hybrid load distribution grid tied directly to a seismic buffer. I designed it after the 09 Bayline collapse. Your revisions. His eyes flicked toward Derek, removed that buffer, and redistributed weight unevenly across 4 junctions. Under optimal conditions, maybe it holds. But introduce vibration. Rain, saturation, temperature fatigue. Ray tapped the page. You were building a time bomb. It just went off. One of the older engineers leaned forward, squinting at the diagram. Where did you pull this from? Ray shrugged. My garage wall, right between my daughter's coloring books and an old coffee filter. Maya smirked, briefly, but Derek's voice sliced in sharp and theatrical. This is speculation at best. We've had a dozen inspections. Nothing flagged. Ray turned to him. Because inspections are built on assumptions, and you were too proud to question yours. He paused, then added quietly, "You didn't revise the blueprint. You amputated it." That landed. Hard. Derek's jaw twitched. "Do you have any idea what you're accusing this company of?" Ray met his gaze unblinking. "Not accusing, explaining. You can choose which one keeps you up at night." The room shifted. Power was no longer in Derek's voice but in the stillness around Ray's. Maya finally stepped in. "I'd like Mr. Donovan to review the materials for Phase 3. Effective immediately." Derek's voice pitched up. "You can't be serious. He hasn't been licensed in over 7 years. He's not even an employee." "Then make him one," Maya said, crisp and final. Ray looked over, startled. "That's not what I agreed to." Maya turned to him, voice softer. "I'm not asking you to wear a badge, Ray. I'm asking you to help me stop more people from getting hurt." Ray took a breath. His jaw tightened. "I'll consult," he said, "but I'm not stepping back into that world." Later that evening, Maya found him alone in the glass-walled conference room, poring over cross-sections of girders and truss tension curves. The city glowed behind him, indifferent to the man quietly redrawing its bones. She knocked gently on the doorframe. "You hungry?" Ray didn't look up. "Had a sandwich with Sophie before we left." She stepped in. "She's remarkable." "She was born premature," Ray said, adjusting a line on the screen. "Doctor said she wouldn't walk, said she'd have developmental delays, that she'd need full-time care. They were wrong on all counts, except one. She does need care, just not the kind they measured in charts." Maya leaned against the wall. "I used to think numbers were the only truth that mattered. But lately—" Ray raised an eyebrow. She sighed. "The man who died this morning, Luis Salgado. He was 29, just got promoted, has a fiancée. She sent me a message an hour ago asking if he had his safety vest on when it happened." Ray's hand stilled. "What did you say he asked?" "I told her he wore it every day," Maya replied. "Even though it wouldn't have made a difference, she needed to hear it." He nodded slowly. Maya continued. "You could have fought us, sued us. Instead, you buried the past and raised your daughter." "She's the only thing I didn't fail," he said quietly. "You didn't fail," Maya replied. "We did." There was a long pause, then Maya took a deep breath. "Why did you walk away, Ray?" He stared at the glowing screen, then leaned back, eyes distant. "Because after Angela died, I kept showing up to work hoping someone would say, 'We were wrong.' But they didn't. They just sent flowers and reassigned my project. Every floor I stepped on smelled like apologies that never came. So I walked. You didn't deserve that. People rarely get what they deserve," he said. "They get what they fight for. I stopped fighting." He looked at her finally. "But you didn't." Maya blinked. Then, without thinking, she said, "We're redesigning more than a bridge, Ray. We're fixing what we broke." Ray looked back at the screen. The cursor blinked over a line of calculations that for once aligned perfectly. "Then, let's build it right. This time," he said. In the hallway outside, Sophie stood with her sketchbook peeking through the glass. She couldn't hear their words, but she saw something shifting in her father's face, something lighter. She smiled and whispered to her page, strong enough to carry the moon. The elevator doors closed behind them with a sterile chime. Ray stood stiffly beside Maya as the cab began its slow ascent to the design lab. He had showered, shaved, even borrowed a collared shirt Maya insisted was company standard. But the unfamiliar fabric itched at his neck, and his boots, though clean, squeaked against the polished floor like they didn't belong. He shifted. "I look like I stole a dress shirt from a thrift store." Maya glanced sideways. "You look like someone who doesn't need a suit to be taken seriously." "Tell that to your board." "I just did," she said, not missing a beat. Ray let out a soft huff, more exhale than laugh. "You're not what I expected from a corporate lifer." "I'm not what the board expected either," she said, tone tight. He looked at her. Then, how'd you make it to the top? She shrugged. Same way you stayed upright after being shoved off the map. Ray smirked. Stubbornness. No, she said, because failure doesn't get the final word. Not if you show up the next day. The doors opened to a floor bathed in warm light wood-paneled walls, brushed steel beams, and the subtle scent of graphite and fresh coffee. The design and simulation lab. Inside, a group of engineers, mostly younger, clustered around a central display where a large 3D model of the Echelon overpass hovered in glowing blue holograms. They looked up as Maya and Ray entered their conversations, tapering to whispers. A few eyes widened. That's him, someone murmured. Ray felt the air shift, like walking into your own eulogy. Maya turned to the team. Everyone, this is Ray Donovan. He'll be consulting directly on phase redesign. I suggest you treat him with the same respect you'd give Newton if he walked in here and told you the apple fell sideways. Nervous chuckles. Then a tall, broad-shouldered man in a checked shirt stepped forward. Ethan Wells, Senior Simulation. I studied one of your tension grid papers in grad school. Ray blinked. You studied my work? Only paper I've ever read that quoted Springsteen and trigonometry in the same paragraph. Ray grinned. Yeah, I was going through a phase. The room relaxed. Over the next few hours, Ray sat with the team dissecting schematics, proposing adjustments, highlighting fracture stress points where years of cutting corners had weakened the skeleton of what was once a visionary design. He scribbled notes, argued equations, challenged assumptions with the quiet authority of someone who'd once been laughed out of the room and had come back anyway. At one point, Ethan nudged him. Sir, where did you learn to model harmonic dampening using temperature flow maps? Ray didn't look up. In a garage, with a space heater, and a daughter who drew stars while I calculated how to keep a bridge from collapsing again. Ethan sat back quiet. Later that evening, the room emptied slowly. Maya stayed. Ray stood at the window looking down at the city below its arteries glowing with headlights and promise. She approached. You fit in better than you think. He gave a wry smile. I've been a ghost too long. The living don't trust the dead. Maya leaned beside him, arms folded. You weren't dead, Ray. You were grieving. There's a difference. His face stiffened. I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet, maybe I could outrun it. The shame. The blame. Angela's last call was to me, you know. She said she'd wait under the tunnel until the rain eased. I told her to stay there, that it was safer. Maya looked at him. She trusted you. She died trusting the wrong blueprint, he said bitterly. That's what I can't shake. Silence wrapped around them like fog. Then Maya said softly, You're not responsible for the corruption that buried your design, but you are responsible for what you do now. Ray turned to face her. And what are you responsible for? Maya. She looked at the skyline. Her voice lowered. For being so obsessed with building up that I never looked down. I used to think success meant distance between me and the ground, between me and the past. But the higher I climbed, the lonelier it got. Ray searched her eyes. Is that why you came looking for me? No, she said. I came because people were dying. But I stayed because you reminded me why I got into this in the first place. He tilted his head. To build something that lasts. She shook her head. To protect people who can't afford to fall. Back at the garage, Sophie waited up late, her notebook open on the kitchen table. A new drawing, this one of a tall woman standing beside a man with oil-streaked hands, both of them holding up a bridge shaped like a heart. When Ray came in, she looked up. How was your day? She asked already. Yawning, he kissed her forehead. Different. Did they like your math? They listened, he said. That's better than liking. Sophie nodded as if that made perfect sense. Did you give her the flower? Ray frowned. What flower? Sophie opened the fridge, pulled out a slightly wilted daisy tucked in a mason jar. For the lady in the black blazer, she said. She looked like someone who forgets to smile. Ray stared at the flower, then at his daughter. "You've been watching too many movies." Sophie grinned. "That's how I learn who the good guys are." Outside, the wind picked up. The city kept humming. And somewhere behind glass and concrete, two people who had lost everything they once built were beginning to build something else quietly, brick by emotional brick. Maybe it wasn't a bridge. Not yet. But it was strong enough to stand on. The rain came down in sheets that evening, the kind that blurred headlights and made the city look like it was breathing under glass. Inside Ray's garage, the scent of motor oil and wet asphalt mixed with the cinnamon candle Sophie had insisted on lighting. Maya stood near the open door, water dripping from her trench coat, her eyes scanning the cluttered space. "This is where the revolution started, huh?" Ray chuckled from behind the workbench, wiping grease from his hands. "More like where it went to hide." Sophie popped her head in from the small kitchen corner. "Want some tea? Miss Maya Daddy says guests get the real stuff. No bag, only leaves." Maya blinked, touched by the formality. "I'd be honored." Ray gave Sophie a wink. "One day she's going to run a country." "She already runs this garage," Maya replied. They sat around the small folding table, mismatched mugs in hand. Rain tapped on the windows like fingers drumming on old memories. "Everything in here has a story," Maya said, glancing at the wall filled with yellowed blueprints, sketches, and photos tacked up with tape and thumbtacks. "Do you keep them for yourself, or for someone else to find?" Ray looked up. "Some days," he said, "they remind me who I was. Other days they remind me who I don't want to be again." He stood and walked over to a framed photograph, dusty but intact. It was of Angela, holding baby Sophie, both of them caught in a beam of afternoon sunlight like something out of time. "I built my best ideas when they were asleep," Ray said. "I'd stay up all night sketching. Back then I thought brilliance was the cure for grief." Maya stepped beside him, her voice low. What changed? Ray didn't look at her. Turns out grief doesn't want to be cured. It wants to be carried. That silence again, the kind that's not empty but full. Of history, of things unspoken, of two people learning the shape of each other's losses. Maya broke the silence. "We have a problem." Ray turned to her, immediately alert. "What kind?" Derek pulled the revised safety audit from the system. "He's claiming your blueprint was a preliminary theory, not ready for integration." Ray's jaw tensed. "Of course he is. If it gets implemented, his entire project history gets dragged through the mud. He's lobbying to proceed without structural changes." Ray ran a hand through his hair. "He'll bury the report, declare it inconclusive, and move on like nothing happened." Maya didn't blink. "Not if we stop him." Ray looked at her. "You're the CEO. You don't need me to pick that fight." Maya met his eyes. "I need you because I can be dismissed as political. You're the truth no one wants to admit they buried." Ray sat down slowly. "You do realize you're dragging a man with no title, no license, and no allies into a corporate war?" Maya folded her arms. "I'm not dragging you anywhere, Ray. I'm standing beside you. But if you want out, now's the time." Ray thought about it. Thought about the steelworker's widow who still hadn't received a full report. Thought about the whisper in Sophie's voice when she'd asked if buildings could cry. Thought about Angela, whose death had been reduced to a quiet paragraph in a quarterly report. He rose. "Where do we start?" The next morning, they walked into the Centricore Planning Committee meeting like they'd already won. Maya wore a dark green suit that made her look like both a warrior and a witness. Ray wore a clean shirt sleeves, rolled no tie, just a pen behind one ear and a folder full of calculations under one arm. Derek didn't look up when they entered. "You're not on the agenda." Maya smiled tightly. "We are now." She plugged a tablet into the projection system. A holographic model flared to life, two side-by-side versions of the Echelon support system. One pulsed red in critical joints. The other, Ray's original configuration, glowed clean and green. The left, Ray began, voice steady, is what's currently being built. The right is what was once approved, then quietly stripped of 19% of its material integrity. Someone from operations squinted. These numbers don't match the audit. Ray nodded. Because the audit was doctored. The room stirred. Derek stood. That's a serious accusation. Ray's gaze didn't waver. So, is losing another life because a spreadsheet looks better without a buffer zone? One of the engineers leaned forward. How do we know your model's more accurate? Ray stepped forward. Because it's already been tested by time. The original system was deployed in 4 regional bridges. All of them are still standing. The revised version, we just saw the results. Silence. Then Maya said firm and clear. Effective immediately, all ongoing construction will pause until Ray's design is properly reviewed. I'm invoking my executive authority to override Derek's clearance. Derek's voice dropped cold. You're making a mistake. No, she said. I'm correcting one. That night, back at the garage, Ray stood outside under the awning, watching the rain again. Maya joined him. We made it through the first wall. He nodded. There'll be more. She looked up at him. Then we break them, one blueprint at a time. He turned to her, studying the lines of wear beneath her eyes. Why do you fight so hard? Her answer came soft. Because somewhere along the line I forgot what it meant to build for people. Not just at them. Ray smiled. Then, without warning, Sophie ran out in her pajamas, holding her sketchbook above her head like it was a trophy. Daddy, Miss Maya. I made something. She opened it to a new page. It was a drawing of a bridge with 2 people standing at the center, one holding a wrench, the other a briefcase. Above them, the words, some bridges are built from steel, others from trust. Maya knelt beside her. Did you come up with that? Sophie beamed. No. I just wrote what I saw. Ray looked down at the 2 of them. Something inside him shifted. Maybe the world couldn't be fixed overnight, but it could be redrawn, and this time with no corners cut. It was nearly midnight when Ray unlocked the drawer beneath his workbench, the one he hadn't touched in years. The lock stuck for a moment as if protesting the memory it guarded. Inside, wrapped in a worn canvas roll, were the original blueprints. Not copies, not sketches. The hand-drawn plans, coffee-stained and scarred by time, still bearing Angela's handwriting in the margins. He unrolled them carefully. The paper sighed like it had been waiting. Across the top corner in block letters, Project Aegis Structural Integrity First. Angela's motto, and beside it in faded pencil, her note. One day, someone will try to silence your brilliance. Let the work speak louder. Ray blinked, chest tightening. He heard Maya's voice from earlier that day. You're not the ghost. You're the cornerstone. He took a deep breath and began making photocopies. The following morning, Maya's office buzzed with quiet tension. The storm had only just passed outside, but inside Centricor the atmosphere was shifting faster than the clouds. Word of her override had spread. Some employees nodded respectfully in the hallway now. Others averted their gaze, unsure if her bold move had sealed her fate or saved the company. Ray stepped in carrying a thick folder. These are the originals. Maya raised an eyebrow. You kept them. I kept her, he said simply. She opened the folder slowly. There on the back of one blueprint was a note from Angela to a colleague documenting how the safety load requirements were deliberately altered post-submission. Maya's eyes narrowed. This could end Derek. Ray nodded, and probably half the executive team who signed off with him. Silence. Then he asked, You sure you want to go this far? Maya looked up. Her voice was quiet but steel-edged. If we don't, we become them. She picked up her phone. We'll start with a closed session legal compliance internal audit. I want this on record. I want it clean. Ray tilted his head. And after, we build it. Your way. That night, Maya didn't go home. Neither did Ray. They stayed in the lab reviewing every engineering change order made over the last 6 years. I always assumed Maya said poring over spreadsheets that compliance meant integrity. Ray leaned back in his chair. Assumption's a luxury when you've got power. The rest of us have to prove we're worth listening to, she finished. He nodded, then more softly. You're not what I expected in a CEO. She looked at him, a tired smile forming. That makes two of us. He hesitated, then asked, Do you ever regret choosing this life? She paused, pen still in hand. Sometimes. Not because of the hours or the pressure, but because the higher you climb, the fewer people you can trust. Ray looked down at his hands, and the more it costs to fall. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment the walls between titles and traumas vanished. 3 days later, the internal inquiry exploded. Derek tried to deny everything until confronted with the scanned blueprints bearing Angela's notes and dates logged before any changes were made. I wasn't the only one who approved this, he snapped in the conference room. No, Maya said calmly, but you were the only one who profited personally. She slid forward a document stock trades bonuses and a quietly withdrawn investment in the material subcontractor whose cheaper alloys caused 2 prior structure failures. You buried a warning to boost a quarter's earnings. Derek stood red-faced. You'll burn the whole company down chasing ghosts. Maya leaned forward. No, I'm clearing the smoke so people can breathe again. After Derek's removal, Centricor underwent a quiet storm of its own departures, audits, policy shifts. But out of the rubble rose something new. They called it the Donovan Standard, a revised building code system developed directly from Ray's original plans. It prioritized resilience over cost-required triple verification on safety modeling and demanded a transparent chain of accountability. Ray's name was finally back on the record, but he didn't attend the press event. He was in the garage helping Sophie fix the chain on her bike. You missed your big speech, she said, handing him a wrench. I've said enough lately, he replied. She looked up at him. Are you proud? Ray thought for a long moment. I'm not proud of being right. I'm proud I didn't stay silent. That evening, Maya showed up at the garage with takeout in one hand and a rolled-up certificate in the other. What's that? Ray asked, wiping his hands. She handed it to him. It was a framed commendation from the City Planning Council for services in structural justice. Ray laughed. That sounds made up. It is, she grinned. But they meant well. They sat on the steps, the sunset painting the sky in oranges and golds. You know, Maya said I spent years thinking the best kind of legacy was a name on a building. Ray raised an eyebrow. And now? Now I think the best kind is a voice in someone else's fight. He nodded slowly. And sometimes it's giving someone their voice back. She looked at him, something unspoken, shimmering in her eyes. I never asked, she said. Why'd you keep the blueprints? Ray took a deep breath. Because you can erase a name, but a blueprint. He held up the sheet with Angela's handwriting. A real blueprint always leaves an imprint. And as the last light faded, they sat side by side, 2 people who had learned through failure, through loss, through each other, that some things aren't rebuilt. They're reborn. It happened on a Wednesday. No warning. Just a cold email with the subject line reorganization plan. Immediate implementation. By noon, the Halcyon Room's access cards were revoked. The project was suspended under internal restructuring. Legal had stepped in. The server was locked down. Chloe's badge flashed red at the scanner. Lynn's files disappeared mid-backup. Greg stared blankly at the frozen interface like it had betrayed him. And Ray wasn't even told. He found out when his name vanished from the internal directory. In the garage, the familiar hum of Maya's voice on speaker crackled into static. The call had dropped. He redialed. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. Then a knock at the garage door. Maya stood there, no umbrella, no expression. Her eyes looked like they hadn't slept in 2 days. They pulled the plug, she said. Ray stepped back. What happened? She walked inside, drenched uninvited. Her voice was quiet. Board vote. Emergency session. They want to contain liability. Derek's allies pushed through a full freeze. They framed your blueprint as the source of disruption, not the correction. Ray looked at her in disbelief. They buried the truth, and now they're blaming the man who uncovered it. She nodded once. And they're scrubbing everything. Your name, the model, even Angela's notes. Ray leaned against the workbench, hands shaking. I gave them everything. I let you drag me back into this, I know, Maya said. And I'm sorry. No, you're not. His voice cracked. You still think this can be fixed from inside? She stepped closer. I don't know what I think anymore. There was a pause, heavy and raw. Then Ray said, They'll come after you next. Maya's voice was a whisper. They already are. He looked at her, really looked and saw it. Then the slight tremor in her fingers, the way her shoulders curled inward as if the world had grown too loud to stand up straight in. You're scared, he said. No, she said, then corrected herself. Yes, but not of them. Then what of failing people who finally believed in something better? Ray turned away. They're dismantling a city to protect a secret. And we, she said, are not done. That night the city was hit with the biggest storm of the season. Lightning carved the sky open in flashes. Power grids flickered. Sirens howled in the distance. But inside the garage a different kind of charge crackled. Ray spread out his last remaining copy of the design. Not the digital version. Not the polished presentation. The one with coffee rings, Angela's annotations, and a burn mark on the corner from when Sophie had accidentally dropped a candle on it 3 years ago. He looked at it like a map of everything he'd lost and everything he wasn't willing to lose again. Then Maya's phone lit up. She answered, tense. Chloe's voice came through breathless. Maya, you need to hear this. The temporary flood barriers on the East Sector Halcyon Phase 1, they're failing. Maya's eyes went wide. That can't be right. We reinforced that zone. No, we didn't, Chloe said. Derek signed off on a rollback to the cheaper design. Quietly. And now the levee's giving out. Maya looked at Ray. They didn't just stall your work. They replaced it. Ray was already grabbing his jacket. 10 blocks away, the city's emergency crews scrambled under floodlights, water rising at the edges of the construction zone. Ray climbed over the barricade and flashed a handwritten badge Maya had scrawled on a napkin: Consultant Emergency Review. No one questioned him. Not with the storm screaming and the water climbing and the blueprint in his hands. He scanned the site. His voice rose above the chaos. If we breach past the second pylon, the west corridor will go flood the electrical substation. A firefighter shouted back, What do we do? Ray pointed. You reroute runoff into the open grade lot behind Building C. We'll use the existing framework as a buffer, but we've got 20 minutes. Tops. A young engineer hesitated. But that's not in the approved. Ray cut him off. It's in my design, which is the only reason any of this hasn't collapsed already. Maya was beside him now, shouting over the rain, He's right. Move. They worked shoulder to shoulder, Ray, Maya, the city workers, the volunteers from the community center, who showed up with sandbags and flashlights and thermoses of lukewarm coffee. At one point, Sophie appeared in the crowd holding a small umbrella over an elderly neighbor's head. Ray saw her, and something inside him caught fire. He turned back to the failing levee and yelled, Let's build this like it matters. By dawn, the rain had slowed. The damage was real, but the catastrophe had been averted. People stood in puddles soaked to the bone, watching as the last of the water drained away. Ray dropped onto the curb, soaked and exhausted. Maya sat beside him. He stared out at the bridge in the distance, the one still under construction now glowing faintly in the early morning light. That blueprint, he said quietly. It was never mine alone. Angela shaped it. You saved it. Sophie reminded me why it mattered. Maya looked at him, her voice barely audible. So, what do we do now? Ray exhaled. We build anyway. She nodded, and in that silence, mud-stained, heart-worn, unfinished something unshakable settled between them. Not victory, but resolve. And sometimes that's how legacies begin. The garage smelled like wet concrete and old coffee. Sunlight was pushing gently through the cracks in the bay doors, dust swirling in golden shafts. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, drying her shoes with a hairdryer. A blanket draped over her shoulders. Her eyes followed Ray as he moved silently, folding tarps, checking tools, trying not to look like he was thinking too hard. But he was. He hadn't slept. Neither had Maya. The storm had passed, but the real reckoning had just begun. "You saved a neighborhood last night," Sophie said, breaking the quiet. Ray gave a half-smile. "I didn't do it alone." She looked up. "But they listened to you." Finally. He paused. "Yeah, they did." Then softer. "Took a whole flood to unbury a blueprint." Maya stepped into the garage a few minutes later, hair-damp clothes wrinkled, carrying 2 cups of gas station coffee. "Brought peace offerings," she said, handing him one. Ray took it, nodding toward the folding chair. "You look like hell." She laughed. "Thank you, Ray. You always know how to make a girl feel radiant." He smirked. Then, after a long sip, "They're going to fight back, aren't they?" Maya didn't sugarcoat it. "Hard. They're already spinning it. Saying the emergency response was unauthorized. That your intervention was reckless. They're not wrong," he said. "I was unauthorized. But not reckless," she said. "You were right. And people saw it." Ray ran a hand through his hair. "Doesn't always matter who's right, just who controls the microphone." She sat down beside him. "Then we need a bigger mic." Later that day, Maya returned to Centricor for the first time since the freeze. Eyes followed her down the hallway, some out of respect, some out of fear, and some like Derek's assistant with open contempt. At the boardroom, she was met with a cold smile from Harold Trent, one of Derek's closest allies. "Nice to see you, Maya," he said. "I trust you've had time to cool off." She didn't smile. "I came to finish what we started." He gestured to the empty table. "There's no project left to finish." "That's not what the community thinks," she said. "They're calling it the night the janitor saved the city." His smile twitched. "That janitor violated protocol, endangered personnel, and bypassed executive chain of command, and kept your entire east sector from drowning." Maya dropped a stack of papers on the table. Blueprints, emergency logs, eyewitness accounts, local news coverage. "If you want to erase what happened, you'll need a bigger shredder." Harold leaned in. "You're risking everything. Your seat, your stake, your credibility." Maya looked him dead in the eye. Then maybe it's time the cost of silence became too high to pay. That night she returned to the garage not as a CEO but as someone who had just set fire to the very foundation she once climbed. Ray was under the hood of a Civic. Grease on his hands, sweat on his brow like the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. "How'd it go?" he asked. I poured gasoline on a boardroom and lit a match. He chuckled. "Sounds like my kind of meeting." She sat down on the steps. "I told them the truth. I told them about Angela, about you, about what was buried and what we uncovered." Ray wiped his hands. "And they called me emotional. Said I was destabilizing the company." Ray sat beside her. "You are. But maybe that's the only way to rebuild something stronger." She looked at him. "Do you ever wonder what Angela would have said about all this?" Ray didn't hesitate. She'd say, "Don't flinch." They both laughed. Then Maya turned serious. "You know, I used to think leadership was about control, commanding a room, never showing doubt. And now," he asked. "Now I think it's about listening," she said, "even when the voice comes from the garage floor." Ray tilted his head. "I'm not used to being heard." "Get used to it," she said. "You're not invisible anymore." Later, as the garage lights dimmed and Sophie dozed on the couch wrapped in an old quilt, Maya lingered by the door. "Ray," she said softly, "if this gets worse, If they come after me harder, I need to know something, what that you won't walk away. Not again. He looked at her, long and deep. I won't, he said. Not this time. She nodded. Then, just as she turned to leave, he added, But Maya. She stopped. If they come after you harder than you expect, know this, they'll have to go through me first. And she smiled. Not the CEO smile, not the press conference smile, but the kind of smile that happens when someone feels safe. Just for a second. Back inside, Ray stood at the blueprint table again. He didn't feel buried anymore. He felt alive. The storm hadn't just flooded the streets, it had flooded the silence. And in that flood, the truth had risen like steel from concrete. Unbending, undeniable, unforgettable. By Monday morning, Ray Donovan was no longer a ghost. Local news stations ran segments with headlines like Unknown Mechanic Prevents City Disaster and The Man Behind the Blueprint That Was Ignored. Someone had snapped a photo of him mid-shout during the flood response, hair-soaked blueprint in hand, eyes blazing. It went viral. The internet dubbed him the janitor engineer. Ray hated the nickname. But Maya. She used it like a weapon. She scheduled an open press forum one Derek couldn't cancel because it wasn't company-sponsored. It was public interest, and the public was very, very interested. Ray stood in front of the old garage that morning wearing his best shirt, which still had a faint oil stain on the cuff, and tried not to hyperventilate. Sophie stood behind him on a milk crate, brushing lint off his shoulders. "You look like someone who's about to change the world," she whispered. He gave her a look. "I look like someone who would rather be rotating tires." At City Plaza, the media buzzed like a swarm. Maya took the mic first. She was poised, powerful, but more human than she'd ever let herself appear before. She didn't read from notes. "I'm not here today as Centricor's CEO," she said. "I'm here as someone who witnessed firsthand what happens when truth is buried and how much it costs to unearth it." Then she stepped aside. Ray stepped up. Microphones everywhere. Dozens of eyes. He cleared his throat. "I'm Ray Donovan. I fix things. Mostly carburetors and busted radiators." Laughter. He continued. "But a long time ago I designed something I thought might make the world a little safer. A blueprint. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And it got shelved." He paused, voice thickening. "My wife, Angela, was an engineer too. She believed in solutions. She died in a construction accident that shouldn't have happened. I stopped building after that. Stopped believing it mattered." There was a hush. Ray looked out at the crowd. "But here's what I learned this year. Just because something gets buried doesn't mean it's gone. Sometimes it just needs someone to believe in digging it up." He didn't mention Derek by name. He didn't have to. That evening, in an upscale boardroom with far too much polished marble and not nearly enough soul, Derek Chandler watched the press footage in silence. His assistant hovered nervously. The sentiment shift online is dramatic. Investors are uneasy. Derek's jaw clenched. Get legal. But now. Meanwhile, Maya sat with Ray and Sophie in the backyard of the community center sipping lemonade from mismatched mugs. The kids from the shelter were playing tag. Someone had brought a guitar. Laughter drifted through the garden like wind chimes. Ray stared at the paper in his hand, a letter from the state engineering board. "You passed your recertification," Maya said, unable to hide her grin. Ray looked at her stunned. "You pulled strings." "No." I handed them the footage and the blueprint notes. "You earned that yourself." He shook his head slowly. "It's been 15 years. "You still have it," she said. "You just needed the world to remember." Sophie jumped into his lap, holding up a sheet of construction paper. "Look, I made us a bridge. It was crayon-sketched, lopsided, with 3 stick figures walking hand in hand across it." Ray looked down. One of the stick figures was labeled Mom. His throat tightened. "She's still part of the design," he whispered. Maya nodded. "Always was. 2 days later, the state launched an official inquiry into Centricor's safety compliance. Maya was called to testify. She didn't flinch. She walked into the hearing in a navy blue blazer, no makeup, no entourage. She brought the original blueprint raised with Angela's handwriting in the margins and placed it gently on the table before the panel. "Every corner cut on this project was a risk not worth taking," she said. "And every risk hidden behind closed doors was a choice made in fear, not leadership." Derek's attorney objected. The chair overruled. Ms. Thorne, one commissioner, asked, "Do you believe Centricor's leadership knowingly disregarded your warnings?" "I believe," Maya said slowly, "that they underestimated the consequences of silencing integrity." The room went silent. That night, she returned to Ray's garage with a letter in hand. "They're suspending Derek," she said, "pending full investigation." Ray didn't smile. He simply nodded. "It won't undo what happened. But maybe it keeps it from happening again." Maya stepped closer. "You know, I used to think being powerful meant being untouchable." And now he asked, "Now I think it means being accountable." Ray looked at her. "That's a dangerous kind of wisdom." "It's the only kind that matters," she replied. Then she looked down, suddenly nervous. "Ray, when this is over, if it ever is, what are you going to do?" He met her gaze. "I don't know yet, but I think I want to build again." She smiled. "What kind of things?" He paused. "Things that last." In the quiet that followed, Sophie's laughter echoed in from the yard. The night was warm. The storm had passed. But what they were building now together felt like the start of something stronger. Not because it was easy, but because it was real. It started with a knock at dawn. Ray opened the garage door in his flannel robe, expecting Maya. Maybe a neighbor. Instead, it was 2 men in dark suits holding state investigator badges. Mr. Donovan, the taller one, said, "We're conducting a formal review into the recent incident at Centricor's East Sector project. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Ray blinked at them. "You want coffee, or should I put on pants first?" The interview took place at a neutral conference office 3 floors above a law firm Maya once fired. Across the table, Ray sat in his oil-stained jeans and a clean white shirt. His hands were folded. Calm, but his knuckles were pale. The investigators slid a folder toward him. Inside were printed emails, annotated blueprints, project schedules. Some with signatures, some without. They weren't just asking questions. They had evidence, and they needed someone who knew how to read the silences between the lines. "Can you confirm this was your original design?" the agent asked, pointing to a schematic with Ray's name typed faintly at the bottom. Ray nodded. "That's mine." "But these," he tapped a second set of prints. "This isn't how I drew it. Someone modified it, stripped it down." "Could you identify who he looked at the header?" "It wasn't just anyone. It was Derek." Maya stood in her office that afternoon, arms crossed as Derek stormed in without knocking. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" he barked. Maya didn't flinch. "You mean holding leadership accountable? Yes, Derek. I've made that fairly clear." He threw a document on her desk. "You're destroying this company." She glanced at it, an internal complaint filed under her name citing insubordination and damaging the company's image. She met his eyes. "You buried a safety protocol to save $250,000 in steel reinforcements." "It's business," he said. "We weigh risk, we adjust. That's how things get built." Maya's voice dropped. "No, that's how things collapse." That evening, as the sun bled gold across the rooftops, Ray stood on the porch with Sophie. She sat on the railing, swinging her legs, eating an orange popsicle like nothing in the world could touch her. "Did they ask the scary kind of questions?" she said without turning. Ray smiled faintly. "The kind that need honest answers." She peeled off a sticky bit of orange. "Are you scared, Dad?" He hesitated. "I was. For a long time. I thought if I kept quiet, things would stay safe." "Did they?" "No," he said. Silence never saved anyone. It just gave the wrong people more room. She thought about that, then whispered, "I'm glad you're loud now." 2 days later, the press broke the story. Whistleblower reveals Centricore cut corners on East Sector project. Ray's name was at the bottom of the article, but it was Maya's quote that made the rounds. This wasn't about money. This was about trust. And when that breaks, it's the community, not the stockholders, who pay the price. The fallout was immediate. Derek was suspended indefinitely, a full audit was launched, and Ray was offered a temporary consulting contract with the city's Department of Infrastructure. Maya handed him the envelope herself. "You should know," she said, "it comes with actual health benefits and a parking spot." He raised a brow. "That's the real miracle." She stepped closer. "There's something else." He tilted his head. "I resigned," she said. "What I'm stepping down as CEO." Ray blinked. "You built that company." "No," she said softly. "I rebuilt myself through that company. But somewhere along the way, I started mistaking the walls for the purpose." Ray stared at her, processing. "You're serious? I want to build things that breathe," she said, "not just things that shine." There was a silence. Then Ray smiled. "I guess we're both starting over." Later that week, a town hall meeting was held in the community center. Not in a skyscraper. Not behind glass. Just folding chairs, real voices, and shared breath. Maya took the floor and announced the establishment of the Angela Foundation, a nonprofit initiative to support ethical engineering education and safety reform in under-resourced neighborhoods. She believed in designs that protected people, Maya said, voice-catching. This way, she still can. Ray sat in the back, arms folded across his chest, silent and proud. Sophie whispered to the woman beside her, "That's my dad they're talking about." After the meeting, Ray found Maya in the hallway, standing near a bulletin board with hand-drawn flyers and spaghetti dinner announcements. "You really quit," he said. She looked over her shoulder. "I really did." He nodded slowly. "You okay?" "I'm terrified," she admitted. "But also, more free than I've felt in years." He stepped beside her. "So what?" "Now I don't know," she said. "Maybe I'll build bridges. Real ones. Maybe just ones between people." Ray glanced at her. "Maya," he said gently. "You've already started." Outside, the evening air was soft with spring. Children chased lightning bugs across the grass. Sophie leaned on her father's arm. "You think people will remember this?" Ray looked around at the lights, the laughter, the quiet power of truth finally spoken aloud. "Not just remember," he said. "They'll live in it." 6 months later, the city skyline shimmered with new silhouettes. Cranes moved like quiet giants in the distance, arching steel against the morning sun. But in a quiet part of town, far from the roar of progress, something even more meaningful was taking shape. A ribbon stretched across the entrance of a brand-new pedestrian bridge spanning a gentle creek, modest in size but revolutionary in story. Angela's Crossing. Ray stood beside the plaque, freshly bolted into the stone base. Dedicated to those who build not for glory, but for good. Sophie held his hand, now nearly too big to hold hers. She wore a yellow dress with sunflowers and her favorite sneakers. She looked up at him. "You ready?" He adjusted his collar, still unused to the city-issued consulting badge clipped to his shirt. "As I'll ever be," he said. The crowd gathered in clusters, neighbors, city officials, former shelter families, students in engineering polos. In the front row, Maya stood in a crisp white blouse and jeans. No title, no entourage, just a smile that reached her eyes. A reporter stepped up to the mic to introduce the man of the hour, but Ray raised a hand gently. "If you don't mind," he said, "I'd rather say a few words before we cut the ribbon." He took the mic, glanced at Sophie, and then at Maya. "This bridge isn't about me," he began. "It's about second chances and the people who dare to give them." There was a murmur of agreement. Ray continued. For years, I thought blueprints were just lines on paper. Math, precision, safety. But it took a little girl, a woman who challenged every assumption I had, and a storm that nearly swallowed our city, to show me what they really are. He paused. Blueprints are promises. They're what we build before we build the thing that matters. He turned to Maya. This bridge is named after Angela, my late wife, but it stands because of everyone here, because of you. Then he looked at Sophie, his voice softening, and because of a kid who reminded me that even broken people can build beautiful things. He handed the mic back and stepped aside. There was a beat of silence. Then applause erupted like thunder. Later, Maya found him leaning against the railing, watching kids run across the new bridge. She handed him a coffee. Still 2 sugars, no cream, she remembered. Not bad for someone who didn't want to be seen, she teased. He grinned. Not bad for someone who swore she'd never leave the top floor. She took a sip from her own cup. You know, I think we both needed the fall. Ray glanced at her. To remember how to rise. No, she said. To remember why we ever climbed in the first place. They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze brushing past like memory. As dusk approached, the community center nearby opened its doors. Inside, families gathered to celebrate not with speeches but with potluck casseroles, folding chairs, and a slideshow of the rebuilding process. Photos of Ray fixing beams. Maya in a hard hat laughing with a group of student volunteers. Sophie handing out sandwiches to tired construction crews. Ray walked in stunned. He hadn't known they'd saved all this. He stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, when a small hand tugged at his sleeve. A boy, maybe 7, looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are you the bridge guy?" Ray smiled. "One of them. My mom says you're why we didn't lose our home." Ray knelt beside him. "Tell your mom she was the reason I kept going." The boy's eyes lit up. "Are you going to build more bridges?" Ray looked across the room at Maya, laughing at Sophie twirling at lives stitched back together. "Yeah, kid," he said quietly. "That's the plan." Later that night, as the last guests filtered out and the lights dimmed, Maya and Ray stood in the kitchen stacking leftover pie into Tupperware. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "What's this?" he asked. She opened it slowly. Inside was a fountain pen. Old, elegant, worn by time. "I found it in my father's drawer when I cleared out his office," she said. "He never used it. Said he was saving it for when he finally wrote something that mattered." She held it out. "I think you've earned it." Ray stared at the pen, then at her. "I didn't do this alone." "No," she said. "But you were the only one brave enough to draw the line when it counted." He took the pen. It felt heavy with history and purpose. They walked out into the night together, down the quiet street toward the bridge, past the laughter that still echoed behind them. Maya stopped beside him, hands in her pockets. "You know," she said, "I used to believe the world was made up of 2 kinds of people, those who build and those who break." Ray raised a brow, and now she looked at him. "Now I think the truth is, we're all both. The question is, what we choose to do next." Ray nodded slowly. "Then let's keep building." And together they stepped onto the bridge, not just across water, but into the life they had quietly, miraculously built. Brick by brick, breath by breath, promise by promise. Winter had come again. But this year it felt different. The cold wasn't something to brace against. It was something that reminded them of how far they'd come. From broken blueprints to rebuilt bridges, from silence to laughter, from surviving to living. Snow floated down gently outside the windows of the new Hearth Community Hall. Light from inside poured out in golden rectangles, warming the sidewalk like a hearth itself. Inside, the room was alive. Paper stars hung from the rafters. A string quartet of neighborhood teens played carols near the fire. Laughter echoed from the cafe corner where mismatched mugs and worn storybooks shared space with cinnamon rolls and city plans. Ray was at the back table, hunched over a blueprint red pencil in hand, glasses slipping low on his nose. Sophie sat beside him, coloring in her own version crayons everywhere, her tongue poking out the side of her mouth in concentration. Maya walked in from the kitchen with a tray of cocoa, stopping for a moment to just watch them. Ray looked up and smiled the smile of a man who once thought he'd lost everything and found more than he ever dreamed. "I think we're over-engineering the sled ramp," he said, mock serious. Sophie giggled. "You said ramps need slope. I gave it double slope." Maya raised an eyebrow. "That explains why I saw a 5-year-old fly past the garden shed 10 minutes ago." Ray chuckled. "Innovation has casualties." "Noted," Maya said, setting down the cocoa. "Next time we wear helmets." They sat together at the long wooden table, surrounded by warmth and the quiet hum of community. No titles, no roles, just people. "I had a dream last night," Sophie said, suddenly sipping her cocoa. "That Mom was here." Ray and Maya both looked at her, soft and still. She didn't say anything. Sophie went on, just smiled, like she was proud. Ray blinked, looked down at his hands. "I think," Maya said gently, "she probably is." Sophie nodded. She said something, though, not with words, just with her eyes. "What did they say?" Ray asked, his voice catching slightly. Sophie looked up, eyes bright. She said, "Now you can stop carrying the past, because you built the future." The words landed in the room like snow, soft, silent, but impossible to ignore. Later that evening, a local news crew arrived to do a segment on Hearth Village. Ray tried to slip away unnoticed, but Maya caught him at the coat rack. "They want to interview you," she said. He hesitated. "I'm not really the face of anything." She touched his arm. "Ray, you became the kind of man people believe in. That is the face we need more of." He met her eyes, quiet, then nodded. He stepped into the frame with Maya beside him. The reporter smiled. "Mr. Donovan, many call this place a miracle. What would you say it is?" Ray looked at the lights behind him, at the kids reading books, the woman knitting by the fire, the bridge just visible beyond the frosted window. "I'd say," he began slowly, "it's proof that hope isn't found. It's built." The reporter blinked. "Built with time," he continued, "and patience, and people who see not what you are, but what you could become." Maya glanced sideways at him. Her eyes softened. Ray added, "And sometimes all it takes is one person, believing before the rest of the world does." When the interview ended, the three of them slipped outside into the snow. Sophie danced ahead, spinning in circles. "Dad, look," she shouted. No hands. Ray's breath caught. She was walking, truly walking without her crutch. Just a few steps. Wobbly. Brave. Maya placed a hand over her mouth, emotion swelling in her eyes. Ray walked forward, arms ready to catch her if she fell, but she didn't. She reached the edge of the bridge and turned around. "I told you," she beamed, "this bridge makes people stronger." Ray laughed. His heart felt like it would break from joy. He turned to Maya. "She always surprises me." "She always will," Maya said softly. They joined Sophie at the center of the bridge. Snow drifted silently down around them. Ray pulled something from his coat pocket. It was the old fountain pen she had given him. He handed it back. "You're going to need this," he said. Maya frowned. "Why?" "Because your next chapter's about to begin," he said. "And it's going to matter." She stared at him, then took the pen, her fingers trembling slightly. "I'm not sure I know how to write it," she admitted. "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to live it." They stood together on the bridge, three souls who had come through storms, silence, sorrow, and somehow had built something whole, not perfect, but strong, not flashy, but lasting, a life that felt like it was earned, not given, a love that had been chosen, not rushed, a home that had been constructed not from bricks and beams, but from bravery and belief. That night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the bridge lights glowed golden against the snow, Sophie's voice echoed back to them from across the beams. Daddy. Yeah, kiddo. I think Mom would have liked Maya. Ray smiled. I think she does. And with that, they walked home. One step, one breath, one beautiful new beginning at a time. If this story touched your heart even just a little, we'd love to know. What part resonated with you the most? And tell us where in the world are you watching from. Your thoughts and your voice matter here. And if you believe in stories that remind us of the good in people of second chances, quiet heroes and love that heals, then make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you won't miss the next one. Every view, every comment, every share helps us keep telling stories that matter. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care of your heart, take care of each other, and keep believing in the power of kindness.